Recently, we spoke with our relationship coach, Frank B. Kermit, on how to handle a breakup, especially if there are children involved. We're now going to discuss how to handle a breakup if there are no connection pieces involved and what steps you should take to work through your emotions and behaviors. Frank, welcome back to the Kelly Alexander Show.
Kelly, great to be here once again.
Frank, what is the first thing that you should do with yourself, after you break up with someone or if you get broken up with and there is no one else involved but the two of you?
Well, the first thing is to manage your emotions. Make sure that you don't get caught up in the moment. The pain that you're feeling right now is very temporary. As bad as it was, and we're assuming it's nothing like, we're assuming that it doesn't involve any sort of domestic abuse. It's relationship starts, relationship ends. They tend to go south. It happens. What you don't do is you don't go around bad-mouthing your ex. That's the biggest no-no anybody could ever do. Because that's not a reflection on your ex. It's a reflection on you. You chose to date the person that you went out with. You don't choose who you feel things for, but you do choose who you go out with. And you constantly bad-mouthing your ex, big no-no. What you need to be focusing on is what did you learn from that relationship, and that's the story you tell.
And how do you handle things if you work in the same environment or company and, above and beyond that, if you end up having the same sort of social network?
It's important to remember that when you're dealing with a social network, you do not ask people to take sides and you don't share the personal stories that broke you up. If people ask you, hey, how come the two of you aren't together anymore? The most you should say is something along the lines of, I am disappointed we're not together, but it wasn't working out and we're just better off not being in a relationship. Now, if you can, try to salvage your friendship. But being friends doesn't mean that you're best buddies and that you share secrets and that you tell each other about the new people you're dating. It means that you don't be enemies. You don't get in each other's way. You don't try to sabotage each other's attempts to be happy.
And speaking of sort of being, friends, if you want to put it that way, how do you handle, extricating yourself from your ex's life, especially if, they do want to remain friends? Because I think even with the best of intentions, there probably needs to be some sort of cooling off period.
There definitely needs to be a cooling off period. One of the rules to follow is that you don't flirt with an ex. There are some people who are just generally very friendly and very flirty. And they flirt with pretty much everyone. They make those, little jokes and well, of course. And what I'm trying to say is you don't get into those type of behavior patterns with an ex because you might be sending the wrong message. If your ex is still in love with you and you were the one to break it off, flirting with your ex or insinuating that there might be something that you're going to get back together or joking around about hooking up again, your ex is not taking these as jokes. Your ex might take these as a sign that you want to rekindle. And if that's not the case, it's unethical to do that.
And how do you handle things, Frank, though, if, you're not trying to send mixed signals, but let's say you are the dumper, for lack of a better word, and you are trying to be as compassionate to your ex as possible, and you try to let them know that you still love them and care about them, but that that it's not, sort of meant to be. Because I find it's a fine balance. I feel like there's so many people that when they break up, they don't care about the other person. It's like, screw you, I've moved on, or you make me unhappy, or whatever it is. And so they end it. And then there's contentiousness. But what happens if you just realize as the dumper that it's not working out? You still love the other person, but you just know it's not meant to be. How do you handle that? Because you want to be supportive, I think, if you are a caring human being, but I know that sometimes it can be taken the wrong way.
Well, you're not supposed to be there for your ex when you break up with your ex, even if you still care about that person. The bottom line is you continuing to, quote-unquote, be there for your ex once the two of you have split is just leading them on. It's continuing the hurt. And in some cases, this is a form of emotional abuse because this is how an emotional manipulator would work. An emotional manipulator would break up with the person and then be there for them so it constantly keeps them hooked. You never do that. They need to find their own friends. They need to find their own sources of support. And you might even, bring them to that. But it's not for you to be that source of support.
I think it's good that you said that, Frank, because I think that there are people out there that break up that, aren't trying to be malicious and do want the best for the other person, and they're kind of stuck in, not knowing what to do. So I think it's important that you pointed out that you can't be that person for your ex in
No,
the
you can't.
immediate present moment.
Now, again, let's look at a different context here. Let's say in about 7 or 8 years, you meet up with your ex again and you want to start a friendship, and your ex is going through another breakup and you want to be that friend at that point. If the distance was sufficient enough that the person has no delusions of rekindling and getting back together, okay, you might play that role at that time. But when you are the one who just immediately ended the relationship, being there for your ex is not a good idea. And you have to also remember that sometimes the person will call on the ex to be there. When you break up with somebody, you have to mean it. And if you mean it, it means you remove yourself from that person's life. And it's unpleasant, but it's necessary. Because every time you get pulled back in, well, it's my birthday in a couple of weeks, and I thought we could still spend some time together. If you're looking to continue the relationship, then continue the relationship, and when the tough times come up, don't be so quick to break up. But if this is a real legitimate breakup, that's not a time to be going back and saying, yeah, but it's the birthday. Yeah, but it's a holiday. Yeah, but something was really happening and it really wouldn't be a good idea for me to leave right now. No, that's it. If you're going to go as far as to break up and end the relationship, then do just that. And it is harsh, but that's the point. If you're not sure about whether or not you should break up because there's a holiday coming up, maybe you should be thinking, well, if I'm thinking in terms of a holiday, maybe that's just an excuse and I really want to work it out, but I don't know how.
I think that's so important, Frank. I just think that's such an important thing for people to understand, that you have to have that time frame of separation. And then that brings me to the next thing. What's the difference between, I suppose, staying friends versus staying friendly?
Staying friends means that you're probably going to be sharing secrets. You're going to be involving the person in your outings, in your social events. And staying friendly just means you're not enemies. And that's very important. And I think most couples strive to be friends, and all that does is that it confuses the issue. I can tell you that a lot of people who start dating someone and then find out that their ex-girlfriend or ex-boyfriend is still their best friend, that is a potential threat to any future relationship that either partner wants to set up. Because the new person coming in is going to say, well, wait a minute, if you're still best friends with your ex, why am I here? I'm not going to put myself out there. I'm not going to make myself vulnerable to this situation. That's ridiculous. So it's very important to remember that if you're going to stay friends, chances are that that friendship, especially for the initial while, that friendship could interfere with your ability to meet somebody new. And at the very least, you need to stay friendly. It means that you're not the best buds in the world, that you're not going to, call each other every night or every week just to say, hey, how's it going? It's more along the lines of, I'm not going to be this person's enemy, and this person's not going to be my enemy. We're not going to do anything bad to one another. We're not going to speak badly about one another. We're going to be neutral. And when I say to people, be friendly towards your ex, it means be neutral to them. That doesn't mean that you go out of your way to hurt them. It also means you don't go out of your way to be super friendly to them, because, again, that would just confuse the issue.
Joining us on the show is relationship coach and columnist for the West End Times, Frank B. Kermit. Check him out on his website, www.franktalks.com. If you are the dumper, again, Frank, for lack of a better term, is it important to make yourself available to answer your ex's questions, because they might be, reeling and looking for answers? And do you sort of owe that to them at least once, to have like sort of a big sit down conversation, I guess post-mortem as it were?
Okay, in an ideal world, we would all get the answers that we want, and all those answers would be satisfactory. That's an ideal world. In the real world, most of the time, you're not going to get the answers you want, and the answers you do get won't make the situation any easier. If you are the person ending the relationship, be honest about the reasons. And when I say to be honest about the reasons, I mean explain why you don't see a future with this person. So let's use a very specific example. Two people are dating. They really like each other. One of them is allergic to cats. The other person has a love of cats and, in fact, rescues animals regularly and will sometimes house animals in that person's apartment. Now, they may really get along, They may have such a wonderful connection. But the person who's allergic to the animals is probably thinking, look, I don't see a future because at some point, if we're living together, you won't be able to bring animals into the house anymore. And I can't live with somebody long-term who's constantly got animal hair on them because I'm just going to continue to get sick. And it's one thing if I expose myself every couple of weekends. It's another thing if I'm going to expose myself to that every day, and there is no future. Now, when the person who does the dumping in that situation gives that as a legitimate reason and says, we connect really great, but our lifestyles are incompatible, our medical conditions are incompatible, be honest about that. Sometimes hearing that kind of an honest answer might be enough. However, some people are still unreasonable because they're hurting, and it isn't their logical minds are responding to this. They're speaking from their source of suffering. And they hear this and they say, no, but we can still make it work. I don't understand why you're giving up on us. Look, it could be something as simple as logistics. They simply live too far away from each other, and they spend a couple of hours in commute because neither one has a car. It could be things like that that bring about the end of a relationship that have nothing to do with the really important things like how a person treats you. But when it comes to matching up lifestyles and trying to have a lifestyle with the person that you're in a relationship with, this is important as well. And if somebody doesn't see a future, the ethical thing to do is to end the relationship and say, I'm setting you free so you can meet someone better suited for you, and I can meet someone better suited for me. Staying in a relationship because you don't want to hurt the person, that's unethical because you're preventing that person from finding someone better suited to them than you are.
And Frank, if you are the person that's being broken up with, how should you manage your emotions? Because I'm assuming that, going postal on your ex is not the best tactic.
It's very important to remember, especially now with new technologies and social network websites and that sort of thing, social media networks or whatever the terminology is. It's very important to remember you don't burn your bridges because it's not worth it. It's not worth the long-term consequences. Because let's say even if in that moment you feel so justified, look, even at your best, you're still only 50% of a relationship, and the other 50% is who you choose to date. And if it doesn't work out, you have to take some responsibility in the fact that you chose that other person. And you freaking out on them, even if it might make you feel good in the moment, in the long term, all it does is it hurts your own reputation. In every relationship, especially the fact that most relationships end at some point, whether by death or whether by two people or one person in the couple saying it's over, every relationship has something to teach you. Focus on what you've learned from each relationship so you don't make that same mistake again, whatever it was. And if you can do that, if you can find meaning even in the worst breakups, and find meaning in those relationships by looking at what you learned from that relationship so you don't repeat the behavior pattern, that's the power of a relationship, even if it has ended.
And Frank, you mentioned just moments ago, that initial pain that's so awful and you think your heart's going to fall and break out and, it's just bad times. Are there tricks for a person being broken up with to sort of handle those? And I want to say the initial 2 weeks, because if I look back in my relationship history, it feels like it's always the 2 weeks post breakup that just are god awful. And then after that, I feel like you see the light of day. So what do you say to someone, for the immediate days following a breakup if they're the person that's been broken up with?
Okay, the first few things I would tell them is that it's normal for them to mourn the end of the relationship. There's nothing wrong with that. Trying to hate their ex just to get over the mourning process is not a good idea. Look at what you've learned from the relationship. But mostly, and this is something that I used in order to get over some of the worst heartaches I had, it's a two-step process. The first is you have to manage your expectations. You have to realize that part of your pain comes from the fact that you had unreasonable expectations of that relationship. And when those expectations were not met, that's part of the pain. And the second thing to remember is that you have to go through the mourning process of the future you built up in your head with that other person. See, you're not just mourning the loss of the relationship that happened. You also have to mourn all those hopes and dreams you had about building a future with that person. Here's why. There are conscious thoughts and there's the unconscious. And when you have a fantasy, when you say, oh, I could just picture the two of us together in 5 or 10 years from now, even though the conscious mind says, I know the difference between that fantasy of 5 or 10 years from now and today. The unconscious does not know the difference. As far as the unconscious is concerned, that element, those stories that you played out that are supposed to happen 5 or 10 years in the future are just as real as what has actually happened. And that's why you have to mourn it. You have to mourn the future you built up with that person. Go through that mourning process. This is why one of the tenets of mastering relationship management is that you don't build up these futures like, oh, I wonder what it's going to be like when we're together in 5 years. If the person hasn't even earned that level of commitment from you, just playing around with those ideas becomes very, very hurtful in the end, because your subconscious doesn't know the difference between fantasy and reality. So if you are the type of person that you spend hours upon hours just building up these potential scenarios and family-like scenarios and, well, we're going to retire together, those fantasies also need to be mourned, because they die when the relationship dies. They end when the relationship ends. And you have to mourn for them as if they actually had happened.
Frank, if you do end on good terms, for the most part, what does being a, quote unquote, good friend to your ex mean?
Well, I have a very, very strict definition of what a good friend is. And not everybody agrees with me, so you might get a little bit of controversy with this. But I believe that a true friend wants to see you happy. A true friend wants you to find love, even if it's not with them. So if someone tells you that, yeah, I think we should just be friends, great. Which of your friends do you want to set me up on a date with? That's where you find out if the person is serious about being your friend. If they're willing to set you up on a date with someone that they think is going to be more compatible with you than they were, that's a friend. But if the person says, hey, wait a minute, you're my ex, I'm not going to set you up with anybody, I don't want to see you date somebody else, now you're not being a friend. Now you're being a vindictive ex. And that's part of the reason you need to separate yourself.
Should you ever ask your ex favors, Frank?
Well, my general advice is no, because again, all that's going to do is generate potential negative feelings, especially if the feelings are very raw. Asking an ex for a favor might make that person feel, oh, so I'm not good enough to date, but I'm good enough to do these favors for you. You use me. You never loved me. You've always just taken advantage of me. You don't want to get into that. Now you have the other flip side here. You ask your ex to do a favor for you, and if your ex still has feelings for you, or if the situation is reversed, doing a favor, asking for a favor can be misinterpreted as, oh, it's a sign they want to try to work it out again. And misleading somebody is the wrong thing to do. If you're going to break up with somebody, that's it. It's over. It's done. And if you're not ready to be done, don't break up and try again.
Okay, I just think that's excellent advice, Frank. I think a lot of people get stuck in that middle ground, and very important, either you're on or you're off the wagon. And, something that I just have to bring up, because you often hear of these things happening, of exes hopping in the sack at least once. Is this ever a good idea?
Well, in some cases, it might help people find closure. That one last time, just to, if they know that it was going to be the last time and they want to collect the memories or get something out of their system. Is it a good idea? Well, some people find closure with it, but generally, no, it's not a good idea for a number of reasons. In some cases, all it's going to do is rekindle the feelings that are still very raw. Hopping into the sex will rarely save the relationship. Some people get the thrill of the sex and, oh, I feel so good again. You know what, we're going to try and work this out. But the issues that were there that broke you up the first time are still going to be there after the sex. In absolute worst case scenarios, especially if you're dealing with, let's say it's not just a breakup, but a divorce and an end of a marriage, two people getting together for sex, one person can accuse the other of a sexual assault of some sort. And you have to be very mindful that not everybody out there is an honest person. So in some programs on brutal divorce tactics, They talk about how sometimes an ex will attempt to seduce you and get you back into bed so that they can accuse you of forcing themselves on you in order to, because there's a court case going on, there's a settlement that has to be reached. And this gets very, very nasty when you start involving the law, especially when you're dealing with an accusation that the accusation doesn't have to be true. The accusation alone is incredibly damaging. So the answer is no. When you break up with somebody, getting together for sex, even if you're just doing it as friends, it's just opening up Pandora's box. It's just leading back to a place where you didn't want to be in the first place. Otherwise, you wouldn't have broken up.
Frank, final words for, individuals that have just been, broken up, whether they've done it or they've been broken up with, again, just to sort of have a clear line in their heads of how they should be doing things.
The first thing you need to be doing is figuring out if, A, you need to just spend some time by yourself, figure out what it is you did right, what it is you did wrong, and what to do next. And for other people, it could also just be going out there and meeting new people, not sitting home alone. Some people do very, very well with the concept of, I'm going to be alone for a little while because I just want to do a lot of self-actualization. Other people need to go out and meet new people and start figuring out, I got to try this new interaction. I'm going to try this new behavior with people and see where it gets me. You got to know yourself. But mostly you have to know that the end of a relationship doesn't mean the end of your life. As long as you have learned something from the past relationship, it's now part of your collective experience, and it means that you're going to be in a better position to choose a better future partner to get an even better relationship down the road.
Frank, thank you so much for joining us on the show. I think it's just been an important topic for people to understand, especially when they're in those, deep emotional moments, especially after a breakup. So thank you so much.
Kelly, it's been absolutely great, and I know there's a lot of heartbreak out there, but the great thing about heartbreak is that it can teach you so much about yourself so that you never end up in that situation again.
That's Frank B. Kermit, a relationship coach and columnist for the West End Times newspaper. For more information, again, check his website, www.franktalks.com.